Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for this video, I want to talk about all of the Stephen King adaptations that I believe are better than the source material, better than the books. And of course, like with all of my videos, these are going to be very subjective opinions because I know for a lot of people, the adaptations are almost never as good as the book or the story or whatever. But for me, there's quite a lot of Stephen King adaptations that are just some of my all-time favorite films, or they're just really great, and they either adapt the story so well or they make changes that are preferable to the actual story that I felt that this warranted a top 10 video. So yes, this is going to be my top 10 Stephen King adaptations that are better than the book, which for some people that might seem like a lot, but you got to remember that almost all of Stephen King's books or stories have been adapted in some kind of fashion. Most of the time, they're not great, but we're not talking about those videos. That'll be a future video. For this video, it's all about the adaptations that I really like, that I think are actually better than the book. I would definitely, for most of these, I would definitely prefer to just watch the movie rather than take hours and hours and hours to read the book. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. All right, so for these first two, admittedly, these are not great movies. But I would much rather sit through the movies than read the story. So for the first one, I'm going to go with Dreamcatcher. Now, the movie Dreamcatcher came out, I think, in the early 2000s. So when I saw this movie, I was probably like 9 or 10, maybe even younger. But it was, when I watched it, it was pretty good. Watching it as an adult, you can definitely tell that it's dated and it's not very good. But 100%, I would much rather sit through that 2-hour movie than read this 800-page book. And when I first read this book, I was excited. And I had heard a lot of people say that this is a terrible book. But I was like, I remember the movie being so good. And admittedly, it's not a great book. And funny enough, with a lot of long Stephen King books, it starts out terrific. Like the first couple 100 pages in the book are really good, really great characters, interesting premise, and then the middle chunk of the book is garbage. And the ending is meh, but overall, it's too long. It's 800 pages. Kind of sucks, honestly. I don't plan on rereading this. Maybe way down in the future if I'm curious. But I would much rather watch the movie. The movie, like I've said, it's not great, but it's definitely better than the book, for me at least. In that same vein of like, not a great movie, but I would much rather watch the movie than read the book, I'm going to have to go with Silver Bullet. I'll put a poster right there, which is actually an adaptation of Cycle of the Werewolf, which this came out in the early 80s and is basically like a little werewolf novella that's got a lot of pictures throughout. It's kind of like a graphic novel, essentially. But the way the book is written, I never latched onto it. It never left a lasting impression on me. It's not great. It's one of those things where, like, I always complain about Stephen King books being too long. But this one is the exact opposite. It needed to be longer. Like, I can get through this book in like an hour, and it just doesn't have any meat on the bones. But with the movie, even though the movie is total 80s cheese, and it stars Gary Busey as the crazy drunk uncle. It's such a fun movie. Like it's a fun movie, and I would much rather watch that movie than have to read this. Even though it's a very quick read, like you could read this book faster than it takes to watch the movie. Like I would much rather the movie is way more enjoyable, even though it isn't that great. It's still a fun movie, and I would much rather watch that than read this. All right, the next couple of movies, they're decent movies. Like they're not like all-time favorite movies or all-time like box office mega hits, right? They're just decent movies, and the stories that they're adapted from are decent as well. And again, these are just movies that I would much rather just sit there and watch rather than have to read the stories again. And the first one comes from the short story collection Everything's Eventual. And actually, funny enough, my cover has the story and the movie on it. And that would be 1408. Now, this movie came out, I believe, in 2007, starring Samuel L. Jackson, which is always good, and John Cusack. That'd be a different movie. But anyway, the movie is based on the novella that's in here called 1408, and it's about this paranormal writer who goes to different like haunted houses and hotels across the country and writes books about his experience with them. And so he goes to this hotel room in, I forget what the location is, but the room is 1408. And basically, it's reported that a lot of people have had like severe panic attacks, and there's been suicides and deaths related to this hotel room. And basically, he wants to go there to see what it is, because even though he's a paranormal writer, he doesn't necessarily believe what he's writing. But of course, it's Stephen King, so some crazy shit's gonna go down. And for me, the novella, it's good, but the stuff that happens in it, it's much better to see visually, which is why the movie works. And of course, the cast is pretty good. You know, you got Samuel L. Jackson, John Cusack, and they both do a very good job. And the visuals, admittedly, I haven't seen this movie in a few years, but it's pretty good. Like, it's a good movie. So, yeah, I would much rather watch that movie than to read this novella. So 1408, pretty good movie. Along those same lines, we have a story from Night Shift, Children of the Corn. Now, admittedly, this is a pretty good short story. We're getting ready to read it in a couple of weeks. I think we're reading it either late January or early February for the Stephen King Short Story Book Club, and I'm very excited to reread it. But admittedly, I always remembered the movie being better. Of course, I grew up watching Stephen King movies, so I watched it when I was really young, but then I watched it when I was in college after I read the story, and it still held up pretty well. And it actually expands a little bit because, like I said, the story in Night Shift is actually a short story. So you could definitely read the story faster than it would take you to watch the movie. And the movie is, I think it came out in 1983. So parts of it are a little dated, but it's still a really good horror movie. Starring Linda Hamilton, a.k.a. The chick from the Terminator. And yeah, it's a pretty good movie. It's not going to like blow you away or anything with how great it is, but if you're looking for like a good horror movie, it's solid. And for me, I would much rather watch the movie rather than read the story. But I will say, I haven't read the short story in a few years, so I'm interested to reread it for the Stephen King Short Story Book Club. Shameless plug. And now I'm going to get into a couple of movies that I feel like are better than the book and the story, not because they're just really good, but because they actually changed the ending. Now, it's very tricky with adaptations to change any kind of plot points because readers are going to be upset about this. But for these two, I really like the endings and how they are different than the book. And for me, the first one here I have is from Skeleton Crew, and it's The Mist. Let me see if I can. Yes, The Mist. The Mist is one of Stephen King's best novellas. Very good, very creepy. It's essentially about like all of these. It takes place in Maine. All of his fucking books take place in Maine. Oh god. But it's about basically like this invasion of these like alien bug creatures, and it's about all of these people who have to lock themselves into like this big supermarket, this local supermarket. And so they lock themselves in, and there's a lot of crazy people you meet there, and then eventually they have to deal with like these Lovecraftian like bug things that are trying to kill everybody. And it's a very good novella, but the movie I feel does a fantastic job of displaying the characters and creating a creepy atmosphere, and the monsters look good. But the main reason why I enjoy the adaptation more is that they changed the ending. For the novella, from what I remember, it kind of just ends, and you're like, okay. But the ending to the movie, they just turn it up to 11. Like, the ending is so depressing, so heartbreaking, and it's masterfully done. And it really just ends on like a really just crazy note, and you're just like, man, how are they going to end the movie like that? And so I think the ending to the movie is far superior than the ending to the novella, which is why I would much rather experience it through the movie rather than the book. Also in that same category of movies and adaptations changing the ending to the source material, we're going to have to go with Cujo. Now, admittedly, this is one of my all-time favorite Stephen King novels. I believe when I did my ranking list, which I'll link down below for anyone who hasn't checked it out yet, for my ranking list, I put this in my top 20, I believe. Maybe even my top 15. It's one of my all-time favorite Stephen King novels. But the ending is so damn depressing. And funny enough, I grew up watching these movies, all of these Stephen King movies, and when I watched the movie, it was pretty terrifying because it's about, a Saint Bernard trying to attack, this poor defenseless mom and her like 4-year-old son, and they're stuck in this car and they have nowhere to go, and it's very good, but the movie actually ends on a happy note. So when I went to read this book the first time, I thought I was going to get that ending, but no, the ending for this was horrific. I was like, Jesus, like he really went there. So yeah, so for me, like, they're two great endings for what they're trying to do. The book ending, like I said, is depressing, but it is good. But for me, I would rather this story end on a happy note, which is why I'm glad that they decided to do a happy ending for the movie, which this movie came out, I think, in like the early 80s. So I don't think they would have done that ending anyway. That would have been crazy. But yes, for me, I would much rather watch, not much rather, but I enjoy the ending more to the movie Cujo rather than the book Cujo. So in that way, I do like it more. All right, so I have 4 movies left and 4 books left to show y'all. These are some of my all-time favorite movies, not even Stephen King movies, just some of my all-time favorite movies. 2 of them I would definitely put in my top 10 movies of all time, and the other 2 are pretty close. And for all of these, they're fantastic adaptations, but also fantastic books. So it is kind of hard to say like, oh, I much prefer, the adaptation to the book. These are like super close, but in a lot of ways, they are just better than the source material, and I'll get into that. And so the first one I'll talk about is actually it's the most recent movie on this list, I'm pretty sure. And that will be Doctor Sleep, which admittedly is one of my all-time favorite Stephen King novels, but also one of my all-time favorite Stephen King movies. Now, I read this. This was one of the very first King books I ever read. I read this after I read The Shining in college, because, of course, this was coming out at the time. I was like, oh, I got to read The Shining so I could read this. And I loved them. I loved them both. But for me, not the glaring error, but like the main weakness of this book is that the villains in here aren't competent. Like, they're not, you don't feel scared for the main characters at all, because the characters, the villains aren't that terrifying, and you know that the main characters are going to be fine, essentially. But what the movie does so well, not only is it such a faithful adaptation, they adapt the book so well, the changes that they make, that I think it's Mike Flanagan, the changes that Mike Flanagan makes, he makes the villains so much more antagonistic and so much more villainous and so much more of a threat that you actually do feel threatened for the main characters. And not only does he do that, but he also ties in stuff from the Shining book and the Shining movie. So he also pleases book fans and movie fans at the same time. So Mike Flanagan is basically a god for Stephen King fans, because he's just so damn good, right? And yes, so Doctor Sleep, fantastic movie, fantastic book, but overall, I do think that the movie is slightly superior to the book. Even though it is one of my all-time favorite Stephen King books, the movie is just that much better. The next one is kind of a funny pick, because it's one of the best movies of all time, but at the same time, it's one of Stephen King's all-time best books, and we'll just get into it. That would be The Green Mile. Now, the reason I have this on the list is because it's such a damn faithful adaptation to the source material. And really, can Tom Hanks do no wrong? Like, it's Tom Hanks, people. Literally, like, scene by scene by scene in this book, the director faithfully adapts the source material. And it's incredible, because it's a 3-hour movie, but it doesn't feel like 3 hours. You watch it, and it's just awesome. And he's super, super, super faithful to the book, that it's almost insane. And there's literally only one scene that I can remember that's actually not in the movie, but it's my least favorite scene in the book. It comes right at the very end, and you're just kind of like, this is fine. And actually, that scene is kind of what makes this book not be a 5-star book for me. It's always been more of a 4.5-star read. And of course, that scene actually isn't in the movie, which I think does it a lot of good service, because if they would have tried to adapt that, I don't think it would have worked on screen very well. So yes, The Green Mile movie, I enjoy the experience more of watching the movie rather than reading the book. And also, it stems from laziness, because it is a long movie. Like, it's a 3-hour movie. But I can watch that much quicker than reading this, 500-page book. It would take me a couple days to actually read this book, whereas I can get the exact same story, the exact same emotions, and great acting and great music and everything in 3 hours. So yeah, it kind of just stems from laziness, honestly. But of course, the Green Mile movie and the Green Mile book are fantastic. I would just much rather just watch the movie, because it's the exact same story. All right, so for these last two picks that I have, the two adaptations that I feel are better than the book, better than the source material, one of them I think people will agree with me on. Very popular opinion. The other one, All right, so let's talk about the unpopular one first. And unpopular in the sense that people are kind of divided about this. You're either going to get King fans that think the book is superior, or you're going to get fans that think the movie is superior. Or you're going to get people that have only seen the movie and they've never read the book. Or people who have read the book but they've never seen the movie. Or people that have just never heard of this. That would be funny. Tangent aside, let's go ahead and talk about The Shining. Now, The Shining, in the purest sense, the movie is not a faithful adaptation, really. Like, it takes the main characters and it takes the similar premise and just kind of runs with it and kind of changes a lot of things, which for book fans, I'm sure they're not happy with, right? But for me, like I've said a billion times in this video, I grew up watching Stephen King movies. The Shining was always my favorite. And it's my second favorite movie of all time, other than Pulp Fiction.
Does he look like a bitch?
So yes, I love The Shining movie. And actually, like I said earlier in this video, when I heard that Dr. Sleep, the sequel to The Shining, was going to be released by Stephen King, I went ahead and grabbed a copy of The Shining because I had never read it before. At that point in my life, I had only really read like one or two Stephen King books, and they were kind of fine. But I read this book, and I flew through it. I absolutely loved it. And I, of course, noticed the major changes that were made to the movie. And I think for the most part, a lot of people get angry that Kubrick changed so much. But actually, what he changed fits well for the movie, right? Because the stuff that's scary in here probably wouldn't have been scary in a movie coming out in 1980, right? Like the scenes, like with the hedge animals, like would that have really looked good in 1980? I don't think so. And then, and then there's stuff, like of a lot of this is just people going through past trauma of like Jack remembering a bunch of stuff and Wendy remembering a bunch of stuff. So that doesn't really translate well to movie either. And I don't know. I like the movie better. That's what I'm trying to say here. I like the Shining movie better than I like the book. Like the Shining movie, 10 out of 10, love it. Whereas The Shining, I've read this book twice now. The first time, I absolutely loved it. Gave it 5 stars. The second time, I only gave it 4 stars. I got kind of bored with it. A little, just a tiny bit. Tiny bit. And still, it's a great book, obviously, with great characters. The main characters are great. But it just wasn't as good as the first time. So, yeah. Unpopular opinion. And please let me know what your guys' opinions. I might even put up a poll in my community tab just to see where my audience stands on this. Like, do you like the book better or do you like the movie better? I want to know. So you comment down below, and then whenever this video is posted, I'll put up a poll, and that should be fun. But anyway, oh yeah, I still have one more book or movie to talk about. So yeah, but The Shining movie I do think is superior to the book. Yes. Don't kill me. All right, so for my final pick, this really should come as no surprise to anyone. It's one of the best movies ever made, and it's very faithful, and the changes that they make actually enhance the movie, enhance the story, and it's really just a perfect movie. And I don't think I've met anyone who doesn't like this movie. And of course, I'm talking about Shawshank Redemption. And of course, the novella is Rita Hayworth in Shawshank Redemption, which is, of course, a fantastic novella. It's one of my all-time favorite Stephen King novellas. And for my, overall ranking of his novellas, my series that's coming out, it'll definitely be very high up on the list. But the movie is so damn good. It's flawless. It's a flawless movie. And not only do they adapt it so well, but they actually add in scenes that aren't even in the novella that are really good. Like it's such a damn good movie, and I'm struggling with how to put it into words. Basically, I think I only need 2 words. Morgan Freeman. That's all I need. It's just one of those movies that you could pretty much just watch over and over and over again and never get tired of it. Like, it's one of those movies that would come on like cable all the time, and I would see it like just on a random channel, be like, "Oh, Shawshank Redemption." I'll put that on and just watch it for a couple hours. But for me, the novella, even though it's really, really, really good, it just doesn't have that same rereadability factor that the movie has. Like, I could rewatch that movie over and over again and never get tired of it. I don't think I could say the same thing with the novella. And of course, you could watch the movie faster than you can read the novella, I'm sure. It usually takes me, I can read it in a day, but it would probably take me like 4 hours or so to read it, probably. Whereas the movie's like 2.5 hours. And again, laziness. So yes, I'm sure no one's surprised by this pick. The Shawshank Redemption is just an all-time great movie. Top 10 movie for me personally, and I do prefer it to the novella. All right, so let me quickly run down that list before we end the video. So I prefer Silver Bullet to Cycle of the Werewolf. I think Silver Bullet is just a more fun experience. I would much rather watch that movie than read this. Definitely the same thing with Dreamcatcher, even though it's not a great movie. It's for sure, I wouldn't even say it's better. It's just faster, honestly. Like, it's a 2-hour movie versus a book that you're going to have to spend a week reading. And then 1408, both a solid movie and a solid novella. But I think it works better in film just because of the visuals. Like, you can picture it in your mind, but actually seeing it on screen, I think, works really well. And then Children of the Corn, they're both solid, the movie and the story. But I feel like the movie kind of expands on everything a little bit more, so I do enjoy the movie a bit more. And then The Mist, both a great movie and a fantastic novella, but I think the movie improves the ending. The ending to the movie is superior in my mind. And then Cujo, it's kind of weird, like I said. Like, I love the book, but the movie, the ending is happier, and it makes me feel good, right? Not good, but like better than this. Like, the ending to this is just like, oh geez. And then Dr. Sleep, a fantastic book, but the adaptation is so faithful, and yet the changes that Mike Flanagan makes, I think, is superior to the book. And then The Green Mile, it's one of the most faithful adaptations you will ever get. Like I said, there's literally one scene in the book that's not in the movie, but like I said, it's not a great scene, so it's great that the director decided to not include it. And of course, it's either watch this perfect 3-hour movie or spend a couple days reading this. Laziness. So we got that. And then The Shining, which I'm sure is going to get mixed feelings from my audience. I love the movie. I've always loved the movie. I do love the book, though. But the movie, I think, is superior. Fight me. And then, of course, Shawshank Redemption. Probably surprising no one. It's one of the best movies of all time. I like I've said, I don't think I've heard of anyone not liking that movie. But, of course, the novella is also great. But, like with Dr. Sleep, the changes that are made just enhance the story so much that I had to include it on this list. Basically at the top spot, just to appease everyone. I won't put The Shining on the top adaptation list because it's not a great adaptation, but it's a great movie. And it's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's my favorite Stephen King movie of all time. But yeah, that is my list. That is my top 10 Stephen King adaptations. that are superior to the source material. Down in the comments below, please let me know what you guys thought of my list and what changes you would make to the list. What are your favorite Stephen King adaptations? What are some Stephen King adaptations that you feel are better than the book, better than the source material? I'd love to have a conversation about it in the comments below. And let me know if you guys are interested in me talking more about Stephen King adaptations. Originally, I did plan on making like this grand epic ranking all of Stephen King's adaptations, but guys, I don't have time to go back and watch all of those shitty movies and those shitty like direct to DVD movies and those TV shows. I don't have time for that. So, but I do want to continue talking about adaptations. Like I could talk about his worst adaptations. I could talk about adaptations that I haven't seen yet that I'm excited about. You know, I could talk a lot about adaptations. So, like I said, please let me know if you're interested in that. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and the Bookish Drummer Discord. And if you'd like to further support me, go check out my Patreon. Thank you so much for watching and have a terrific day.